MFA Writers. We're so happy to have you here like always. Here at the pod, we really appreciate all of the support we get from you all, whether that's listening to and sharing the episodes, reaching out to us on social media and by email, or supporting the podcast financially. A special thanks this week to Marjik, who recently donated to the podcast over at buymeacoffee.com/MFA Writers. Thank you, Marjik, and everyone else for the support. It means a lot. You can find MFA Writers on Instagram and Twitter, as well as mfawriters.com. We love to hear from listeners, so feel free to shoot us a direct message on one of those platforms, or an email at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. And if you have a minute to rate or review the show, the best place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. Doing so will help boost our podcast as we try to boost these amazing writers. Also, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, you can apply at mfawriters.com. On that same website, you can also click the support button to support us financially, if it's within your means. Or you can do so by going directly to buymeacoffee.com/MFA Writers. Finally, as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Jonny Teklit. Jonny is an award-winning poet whose work has appeared in the Academy of American Poets, The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The Adroit Journal, and elsewhere. He is currently a second-year MFA candidate in poetry at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he is working on his debut collection. Jonny claims he has an animal fact for any occasion, and I will be asking him to prove it. But first, he's brought a poem to read for us titled Ode to the Head Nod. Take it away, Jonny.
Thank you so much for having me, Jared. I really appreciate it. This poem is called Ode to the Head Nod. It's a sort of silly poem that I wanted to write in like one long punctuationless meander. I can say what it's about, but it'll be pretty apparent, and we can talk about it some more afterwards. So I'll just get right into it. Ode to the Head Nod, of which, of course, there are many kinds. The one you offer the acquaintance or stranger that passes in the hallway or street, whom you don't know well enough to stop for a quick conversation, or whom you do, but time demands you be elsewhere. Or the one that escapes you breathlessly when your lover, with their hand cupped against the crescent range of your hip, who you've noticed is, among other things, very good at asking precise questions, raises their head to ask you if you're okay. But your brain, too busy folding itself over and over again, perhaps into a flower or a paper crane, by which I mean too preoccupied with pleasure to bother with language, settles for a rapid bobbling, which, it's true, resembles the wordless, though not necessarily without sound, slow nod that follows the first bite of an awaited meal. Eyes closed after the day you've had, after the unabashed eagerness from the server calling out the name of your dish, or the silent nod you give the officer to prevent the curses buzzing in your mouth from getting you killed. The health inspector nod, the surgery news nod, the proposal nod, giddy, just like the day-long nod the sunflowers offer the light, their necks craning and bowing, so many kinds. But this ode is not for them, but for the one I'm feeling tonight at this outdoor venue in Virginia, the band I've waited months to see drawing out of me a dormant delight, the drummer telegraphing a love letter through the stage, up my feet, into the capital city of my body, the rhythm of it, vibrating my chest, pulling my chin toward each shoulder head, bobbing like a pigeon, chief experts in nodding, the high note contorting my face into a smile and a grimace, awe teetering on disgust the way music does, and to my left, the woman I befriended at the start of the show, and the men beside her, and the woman beside them, the whole sea of us in this amphitheater also caught up in this nod, the concert nod, the crown jewel of them all, for the way every nod and all their meaning fold into it. I see you. Keep going. Thank God. Fuck off. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonny, for sharing that with us and for being here.
Thank you. It's a silly one.
I absolutely love that poem, and I was so glad to see that that was the one you were going to share with us. And I think what I love about it the most is that turn that it makes towards the end, and we get like into that concert. And I have this feeling like I'm seeing the writer living this moment. Like I can see you noticing it and then capturing that feeling in the words for us to experience it too. I guess what I mean by that is it doesn't feel contrived to me at all. It feels real. So I'm curious to know if that was based on a real moment, or if it wasn't, how you create that feeling in your poetry, even when maybe it's not a moment you've actually lived.
Totally. So yeah, this poem was based on a real moment. I was at a concert on the Wild Hearts tour, which was a Julian Baker, Sharon Van Etten, and Angel Olsen like trio. They were like going to be, it was like a triple headline tour across the US. It was awesome. And yeah, I was sitting there before the first act, which was Julian Baker, and it was like sunset, which I don't mention that in the poem, but it's like sunset, and like the place is like slowly filling up, and it's like an outdoor amphitheater, so it's like a hill, and like the stage is at the bottom, and then there's like a big lawn behind me, and you just look around, and everybody is just like nodding to the song because it's a seated show, and I'm doing it as well, right? Everyone has their stank face, right, enjoying the music, and I love writing odes in general. I like a lot of my work, even if it obviously includes multiple things. No poem is just one thing, but a lot of my work revolves around or catalogs or writes about joy in a very Rosquet fashion. But I'm interested in like, what's the smallest thing I can write an ode about? Like, what's the like most granular thing? And if you tease it out long enough, you'll find that it's like large, all that kind of thing. And so I was like, I'll write an ode to nodding my head, an action I do all the time, most of the time that I don't even really think about or note as being of any interest. It's just a response we have in the world. But I thought it would be like a fun exercise to see like, can I nod, or can I write an ode to just something like nodding? Which is not to say that I don't lie in my poems either, because there's or not lie, but there's experiences that I don't have that I include in my work too.
Yeah, what I think is really cool about this poem, though, is it's just this, like you said, this thing that we do all the time and don't even think about. But you're able to capture this feeling of like all of us connected in that moment. Like the music is pushing everybody there to like make the same movement. And there's some kind of beautiful feeling of connection between the people.
Yeah. And, whether or not it was successful, the bit at the end where it's like, the meaning of every nod folded into it, I tried to think, okay, when I'm at a concert and I'm nodding, or, when I'm experiencing a concert, what are like all of the feelings that I feel while watching, and can they be attributed to all those other nods that I said before? If someone is doing the raddest guitar solo you've ever seen and you think, get the fuck out of here,
yeah,
right? That can also be what you might think to a cop who's in your face.
Right.
But ultimately, I guess cops notwithstanding, the nod is it just means yes. It just means like affirmative. It means like, to me, what you're at the concert, you're like, it's just hell yeah. It's like over and over again, at least if it's a good concert.
To me, that's the beauty of poetry, right? Is to take like a tiny moment, a granular moment, like you said, and make it about some kind of like bigger human experience. Try to like unfurl that granular moment and capture the feeling of all of it, of just being alive. So yeah. It's cool to hear you like talk about like what you were thinking about and writing those last lines, and like how the head nodding at the concert relates to these other nods. From a process perspective, would you say that most of your poetry originates with a real world moment, or is it kind of 50-50 that you're fictionalizing things and just starting from scratch when you sit down to write?
Yeah, it is kind of a mix of a whole bunch of stuff. I don't sit down necessarily being like, I'm going to write a poem. Well, I guess sometimes I'm like sitting down to write a poem about a particular moment. But I've also sat down to write stuff because I have an image or a detail in my head, and it's not something I've ever seen, but it's something that I'm like, that would be really cool. And so I'm just going to write about it as if the speaker of the poem has seen it. And these things vary, right? Like I've written poems about at the bookstore I used to work at in Washington, D.C. Across the street, there was a mural for someone who was wrongfully imprisoned. And that building got bought by some company. And so part of their renovations involved power washing the mural away. And so thinking like, okay, I'm watching this face literally disappear. I could write a poem about that, as they are also disappeared from like, everyday life through incarceration, that kind of thing. But then also I've written poems I have like a mini series. I've only published one of them, I think, but I have a series of poems that are like titled Dreams, and they're all like, they all come off as if each one of them are dreams. I don't think I've dreamt any but one of them. But it was just sort of like, yeah, I can write a poem about a bunch of caribou or reindeer like migrating, and then they come across me, but I've never dreamt that. But it's just like something that I find for some reason like tantalizing, or there's something about the image that draws me. In the same way that someone can see a beautiful, like, I don't know, like a beautiful flower coming out of the pavement and want to write a poem about it. But also, you can very easily just, whether it's cliche or not, that image makes sense regardless of whether you just saw one or just conjuring it out of your head.
Okay, so this might be impossible to answer, but how do you know when you're out in the world and you see something that it belongs in a poem? Do you just feel it? Do you have this feeling like, oh, that I'm going to write a poem about that?
That's a good question. I have the instinct of I want to try and write about XYZ more than what I write about ending up being good. But I was surprised that I got so much out of the head nod poem, I should say. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, sure.
It was just like, sometimes I'm like, oh, I want to write a poem about this thing. And then at least whether it's the state of mind I'm in or the place I'm in or my expertise or understanding of that thing at the time, sometimes I exhaust what I have to say about it relatively quickly. I once tried to write a sonnet with like perfect 10-syllable iams and everything. And I wanted the entire thing to be a restaurant order, like someone going into a deli and ordering a sandwich. And I wanted their sandwich order to be like for them and their kid. I wanted it to be 14 lines long. And I wanted each line to have 10 syllables, right? And so I made it work, right? And I just called it Restaurant Sonnet, and I've never done anything with it, But then also that entire order completely made up. Yeah. It sounded good. Like I would order that, but I was more so being like, okay, what ingredients would work for 10 syllables? If I say caramelized onions, that's most of the line. Yeah, sometimes it just strikes you. And then sometimes I'm like, this is just really pretty, and maybe that's all it is, and that's fine. Or like, this is a cool moment, and maybe it just exists as like a story I tell rather than like a poem I write. But yeah, I try with a lot of things, and they'll just exist in the bank or vault of my head for some amount of time until they materialize into something or don't.
I want to talk about that a little bit more, that idea of just trying things, because I read another of your poems called Walter Scott Visits Jacob Blake in the Hospital and They Spend the Whole Night Hugging, which is a great title, by the way. Yeah. Listeners can find that one over at glasspoetry.com if they want to check it out. But the poem starts like this. I wanted this poem to be something surreal. I wanted it to be soft, the tender haunting of a dead loved one visiting you in a dream. And then a few lines later it says, the tenderness never came. So that to me feels like a poem that can only be written if the poet is comfortable with playing around, with experimenting, with not being too set on what the poem is supposed to be when they sit down to write, but like letting the poem become what it wants or needs to become during the process. Is that important to you, to leave that space in your process for play and experimentation?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm paraphrasing here, but there's a poet named Shira Ehrlichman who talks about how like it is foolish to consider that you can that you know more than the poem, so to speak, and that sometimes you lead the poem, you know what you want to write about, and then as you write, you may discover that the poem starts to lead you. Sometimes when I read fiction, I'm really struck by when a decision really truly seems like a decision that that character would make and not a decision that the writer made the character do. Because if you spend enough time with a character and they're fleshed out well enough and you have a decent understanding of like their interiority and also the way they live and interact with others, even when they make a bad decision, you're like, well, of course they think that's the only avenue, as opposed to being like the author is trying to put the plot in a particular direction. And that happens, I think, in slightly different ways with poetry, where there isn't something like plot necessarily or character development necessarily. But sometimes you're writing a poem and you arrive at an image, especially if a poem is long, you may arrive at an image and you're like, oh, I didn't expect to get here. But, if poetry is all about whether obvious or subtle or abstract or concrete, or if it's all about like associative leaps, if you see something on the sidewalk and something about the sidewalk reminds you of your grandmother, right? And then something about your grandmother reminds you about how, like her life was hard, and life was hard reminds you that you missed your bus stop or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that kind of stuff is like cool. It's like really surprising. And so it's fun as far as like play and experimentation goes to try like free writes, or I'm really bad at free writes. I'm constantly trying to like self-edit on the fly. And that's like a muscle that I have to like try and like let go. There's a website it's kind of diabolical, but it's like a free write website, and you put a little timer in and you start typing. And if you stop typing, it slowly starts to disappear. And so it's like, and it'll only stop and become like a static document once your timer is complete.
Wow.
Which is, horrible. Like I can just write in a notebook and not have to deal with that. And I don't use it very often, but yeah, it's just fun. It's just, when I wrote that poem about Jacob Blake and Walter Scott, it was shortly-ish after after Jacob Blake was murdered. And, I knew that some years prior, Walter Scott was murdered in a similar fashion. And, I wanted to like write something about like whether it was like love or something that was hopeful, because I wanted something like that for myself. But I'm also aware that these are actual literal people. And so it's not something that I can on a whim, like use their names or whatever to be like, things will be all right. Because that's not my call to make.
All right. Well, let's talk a bit about making time to write. Anyone who is around successful creative writers will no doubt hear all kinds of advice about when and how much they should be writing. Some writers only write in the morning, some only write at night. Others say you should write every single day for a set number of hours or until you reach a set number of words. There's a lot of advice out there. What does your writing schedule look like, and how has it evolved over time?
Yeah, it's like the most common question that writers get about like their process and stuff like that. And I think it's because people that want to be writers or emerging writers of any kind in any age are looking for like something like a guide, or like, I want to be able to do this. What things should I put in place in order to do this? Which meant that I would always be upset when I was younger, when the writer would be like, well, it's different for everybody. It's kind of hard to say. And I'm like, no, just tell me the secret. Just tell me, please. I just want to. But, it's different for everybody. It's true that if you want to be a writer, the only thing you have to do is just write. Like everything else will happen. I write regularly, though I do not write every day, and I do not write at a set time. I think the only like rule, so to speak, that is helpful to learn, or at least was helpful for me to learn, if I don't want to be too prescriptive, is to write regardless of inspiration and just think of it as like, I'm going to write a poem about XYZ. And that might be inspiration because you just saw something that wants you to write a poem about it. I'm in a stage now where if I'm trying to draft my collection, now I'm like, okay, I have gaps in this sort of like collection that I'm envisioning in my head. So now I have to write a poem about this, even though I haven't yet or thought about it yet. And so it doesn't matter how I feel about it. It'll make the work stronger. And so that's up to me to excavate and figure out. And so sometimes I write in the morning and it's like 4 hours of writing. Sometimes I write like in the middle of the afternoon when I'm hungry and I'm cranky, and it's 10 minutes. And it's not, sometimes I write 2 sentences or sometimes I have an idea and I'm like, this is totally going to work. And I sit down and I actually almost have nothing. Like I have so many ideas in my head, but for whatever reason, they're like not translating in a way that I'm satisfied with on the page. And so I just leave it. I have so many documents on my like Google folder or whatever that are just titles or like just like 2 lines and nothing. Like that's it. Or in my notebook, I have, I'm like a very big color coder. And so I'll have in like a different color pen because it'll pop out more like, oh, come back to this. And I never do. Yeah. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, wow, I should have come back to this. This was actually pretty cool. I should return. And then great. The ink has done its job. As long as you're writing regularly, I think it's harder for fiction to not have some sort of steady routine because the quantity of what you're writing is so much more. And that's something that I'm going to have to figure out for myself as I dabble in prose writing and that kind of thing. You have to make sure that the output is matching the kind of genre you're trying to do. But yeah, it varies. Sometimes poems come out fully formed in like 20 minutes, and sometimes you spend 4 hours on a sestina because sestinas are so hard. Yeah.
Well, whatever you're doing, it's working because you've got lots of great publications, which I highlighted at the start of the interview, and you're attending what is considered to be a really good MFA program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It's a 2-year, fully funded program with tracks in fiction and poetry. It's a pretty small program, only accepting 6 students each year. And it's unique in that it has an alternating genre admissions policy, meaning they accept fiction applications in the fall and early winter of odd-numbered years and poetry applications in the fall and early winter of even-numbered years. What do you think are the benefits of this alternating genre admissions policy?
Yeah, I love that all the poets that came in with me, it has benefits and drawbacks. We all come in at the same time, and we're it. Like we are the poets in the program, and so we rely on each other. Maybe it's hard to say because obviously I don't go to another MFA, but maybe a bit more than some other places. The faculty, like the poetry faculty, are like dedicated to us. Like we are the people that they focus on. Obviously they have other commitments and they teach undergrad students as well. But like, it's just, I think it's sweet. The downside of course is you may not get to interact with poets that are in the program who are older than you, or poets, who maybe have been around the block and like can give some advice and that kind of thing. But as far as Madison is concerned, the city, so many poets or people from the program stick around at least for a little bit. And so I am good friends with poets who have not only from the previous cohort, but like 2 cohorts ago. And it's the same there's a fellows program at UW-Madison where they accept some fiction and poets. I think they accept 5, I believe, but it's not like a standard 3 fiction, 2 poets. I think it just kind of varies, but they try and have a bit of both. And it's fun to talk to them who are usually post MFA and they're like, they have experience of a different kind. I don't know. Yeah, it is unique and I do enjoy it, but I think I also greatly enjoy it because I like my cohort so much, which was a big deal for me too.
Well, before we talk about that cohort, let's talk about the greater creative writing community in Madison that you mentioned, because the program's website says that there are these postgraduate fellows you mentioned, former fellows and alums that have stuck around in Madison, PhD candidates in contemporary literature, and a host of other artists and writers living in the city. I'm curious, does the program help you to tap into that greater community in Madison, or are you kind of just trying to figure that out on your own?
Yeah. I mean, like it kind of depends. So like there's a bunch of readings happening in the city at all times, and the MFA department, like the faculty, will let you know when they're happening. There's a reading series that happens here once a month called Monsters of Poetry. It takes a little break in the summer, but it's going to be starting up again at the end of the month. And it's awesome. It's run by like people that were fellows like years ago. And there's other spaces in town. There's a place called the Arts and Literature Laboratory, or Art Lit Lab. And they have a bunch of reading series and like artist residency stuff. I am the like host of a monthly reading series there called the Watershed Reading Series. And it's the third Saturday of every month. And the majority of people that attend are not associated with the school. It's like, yeah, it's just neat. And so then some poets show up, they read for a bit. It's just an hour long. And then there's a Q&A at the end, but students also come to it because attending readings, as far as Intro to Creative Writing is concerned, is like attending 2 readings in the city is like part of their syllabus requirements. And so, yeah. And then there's like bookstores that have readings and like that kind of thing. And so the school makes you apprised of those things, especially in the beginning. And then if you choose to follow those sources, like I follow Monsters of Poetry on Instagram, I follow Art Lit Lab on Instagram.
Right.
I just start to become more and more aware of those things.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about that cohort that you're in. It sounds like you've had a really good experience with your cohort. I want to hear about that. And I also want to hear about the pros and cons of being in such a small program, because they only accept 6 students each year.
The con always about a small program is that you might not like the people you're with, right? And then you're stuck with them for the most part. The pro is the dedicated time you can have with faculty. And the poetry faculty here is really good. It's almost 1 faculty per student.
Wow.
Like that's incredible. And, you know, everyone by the very nature of how we read and write are going to be drawn to different professors' styles and voices and revision tactics and generation of poem tactics, right? And so, yeah, there's like so much time you can have with your individual or multiple professors if that's what you choose. And the reason the cohort being so small is also why I put like such heavy stock in making sure that I really liked everybody that I was meeting. And it's like, obviously it's just one of the factors. You know, you also have to consider stipend and is it a state you want to live in, and, you know, like rent in that city, all that stuff. But I knew when I visited UW-Madison in March of 2023, before I attended, I just got along really well with the 2 people that were also visiting, and they also are in the program now. Yeah, it matters. If you feel like you're getting along really well beyond like, and obviously you may not know for sure. We only met for 2 days, but if you get the sense, oh, these seems like people I could like actually be really good friends with, as opposed to like, oh yeah, they're cordial, and, you know, maybe they'll be good workshop mate or something like that, which is not an expectation of a workshop. Certainly, you don't have to be like best friends with everyone in the workshop, but it makes it much sweeter. And we like hang out a lot. We like, you know, we do a ton of extracurricular things. Like a bunch of us, you know, whatever, we like played pool yesterday, or we go thrifting, or we, you know, whatever, go mini golfing. It's just like, it makes it feel like we are all in school, and we're in school for a particular purpose, but it's good that it feels like life generally. And my undergrad professor, my thesis advisor, Meg Day, who's also a poet that teaches now at NC State, was like, you know, you have to consider that the MFA is not going to be your whole life. And so you have to make sure that you like the place and the people beyond their capacity as like workshop mates or anything like that. Yeah.
It would be great if programs made more of an effort to get the applicants that they've accepted together before they make that decision. Because for a lot of people, I think you just don't know. It's like,
it's hard. It's
I like
really
the
hard.
program, I like the professors, I like the place, but I haven't met any of the people that are going to be in my cohort. And so I'm just rolling the dice. It'd be great if there was a way to like meet those people before accepting.
Yeah. You know, there's some efforts that are done on the part of like, you know, there's like the draft, right? Which I think is like some
MFA
Facebook
draft
group or something, which I discovered after I had already accepted where I was going, because I don't go on Facebook anymore. And so I didn't know about it at all. But yeah, that can be like harder, and like there's like way more people. It can be more overwhelming. There's like a whole bunch of stuff there. But I mean, I even valued visiting schools that I ultimately chose not to go to, because I ended up liking some of the people that I met there, who, whether they did or didn't choose to attend those schools. And now I keep in touch with them too. And it's just nice to know other writers who are like entering more or less, regardless of age or experience, we're all kind of like entering this like same thing at the same time. And so you know like who your peers are across multiple states and institutions. And that's nice.
Well, it sounds like the program at UW-Madison has a lot of flexibility built into it around which classes you can take. There seem to be a lot of electives. So I'm curious to hear how important that has been for you, having that sense of choice in the program. And I also want to hear about this comics class that you've mentioned that you say changed your life. I have to know more about that.
Yeah. So it is incredibly free in terms of what you can do at UW. You have to take a workshop in your genre for 3 semesters. If you're teaching in the first year, you have to take pedagogy in the first semester. So there's a chance that in the first semester of your first year, you have no electives. You just take those 2 classes and then you teach your own. But other than that, you can take pretty much anything as long as you hit the like credit requirement. The MFA like department, they like encourage you, they're like, you're here to write. You don't want to take anything that's going to like totally overwhelm you or give you like so much work that you feel like you're slacking on writing or something like that, because you are a writer here first and foremost. But they wouldn't stop you if you think you can do it. And if you think it's something that might benefit your writing in some way. There's poets here who have taken like philosophy courses. There's poets who have taken, some of them have like impacted their writing in like very direct ways. Some of them have taken like graduate level literature courses on like diasporic literature. And like that helps their own research in their own poems or something like that. And so many people in the program kept recommending this comics class called Making Comics. And the only hesitation that people tell you about is that it's a lot of work. It's 5 hours of in-class time a week. And then there's like a bunch of homework. It's taught by Lynda Barry, who's like a very famous comic artist and, has been doing comics and things in that realm for like 30 plus years. And so I took it. 2 other people in my poetry cohort took it with me. It was fun to interact with other creative students who were not writers. But what I really appreciated is I'm not a good drawer at all. That is like chiefly what I said before I arrived to the class. And you have people of all skills. There's some art majors who like want to be comics artists and try and make that work, and they're phenomenal. And then there's people who like, they stick figures are pretty much all they've drawn up until this class. And Professor Barry, or Professor Capybara, because we all had nicknames in class, was very clear with us in the first class that there is no such thing as someone who is bad at drawing. There is only someone who has stopped drawing. And just thinking, reframing, which is something that's like so easy for me to do, and I think so many writers do, reframing, thinking like, this is not good, right? Of like, I don't like this or whatever, to just being like, this is just, it is what it is, right? And I can do it again and it'll be better or it'll be different or whatever. And a lot of that was aided by Professor Capybara having, like, you would draw something that you would think was really crude, and she would point out things. She'd be like, look at like the line work here. Look at the colors that you've done. Da, 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 da. And you would feel good about it. And it would help you like look at your own work and others' work differently, because you would never say to someone else's drawing of maybe a similar skill to yours that their drawing sucks. Right. And she teaches us, like graduate and college students, and then her other class that she teaches is 4-year-olds, like students who like have none of the, or maybe are only just beginning to have the like inhibitions about this isn't accurate or this isn't right and that kind of thing. One thing that I remember she mentions that stuck out to me was, let's say you're trying to draw a face and you draw one eye, right? And you're like, okay. And you draw the second eye. And you're like, no, I messed it all up. Because it's like, it doesn't look like the other eye or whatever. But like, you haven't even drawn the whole face yet. You don't even know like what the rest of it is going to look like. You've drawn like, 2 circles and like maybe like some other concentric circles. You don't know anything about ears. You don't know anything, just like try it. And so one of the rules that we had for drawing is that all of our drawings, if we were drawing people, they had to have ears, they had to have noses. You like couldn't shy away from them. You couldn't be like, this is a circle with eyes. And literally you just be like, oh, I think I know how to draw, you do it every now and then. I think I know how to draw a nose now. I got good at drawing wood grain because I was like I'm like, oh, that person does wood grain really cool. I'm going to do that. Or that person does like branches really cool. And I've always messed up branches. And then suddenly you're drawing trees in a way that you never did.
All right, real quick, before we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about money and teaching. The program is fully funded, as I mentioned, and the funding seems pretty good. According to the website, students receive at least $30,000 in support each year, in addition to tuition remission and faculty level health insurance. In return, students are asked to teach. So first off, are those numbers still accurate? And what does teaching look like at UW?
Yes. So I think those numbers are accurate. It's either 30 or 31.
Okay.
But maybe it's like 31 and then after tax, I don't know. But it's definitely 30 or 31,000, which is an increase from when we arrived, which was 29. Yes. And so if you arrive, you are expected to teach one class. In the first year, you're expected to teach creative writing pretty much off the jump. There's a bunch of templates and stuff that can help you out. And there's a pedagogy class that you take in tandem with that, which I'm really grateful for. One thing that made me pick this place over other places is that I was given the advice that if you're going to be expected to teach, you should go to a place that has a class on teaching, like that on pedagogy that you can take, and not just here's a syllabus that you can edit it or mock up, because it is helpful to know teaching strategies and that kind of thing. And so I'm grateful for that. I've only just started the class, but it's still nice to know that it exists. So in your first year, you teach creative writing. It's just one class a week, one class per semester. In your second year, you're expected to teach like English comp, like English 100. That can meet either 2 or 3 times a week. It just depends. I think all of my cohort mates have 2 times a week this year, and they're hour-and-a-half blocks. But you could have a 3 times a week, 50-minute block. I had a Kemper Knapp fellowship as part of my admission, which just meant that I did not have to teach my first year, and I'm only teaching Intro to Creative Writing in my second year. So I will not be teaching English comp, but that's just one of the fellowships they offer. There's also another fellowship that I think is only for poets. There might be a fiction equivalent, but I don't know the name of it. But the Rank Fellowship, RENK, is for poets, and they only teach in their first year. So they teach creative writing, and then in their second year, their thesis year, they don't have to teach.
Great. Yeah, that all sounds good. And yeah, 30,000 is definitely well above average. So that sounds great. All right. The last question I ask all guests: what is one way in which the MFA experience has been different, for better or for worse, from your expectations when applying?
At the risk of sounding like a broken record, while also knowing how incredibly lucky I am, you read so many tweets and that kind of thing of like the bad workshop person, or like just like a workshop that devolves into, whether it's just being cold to one another, or like there actually being some beef that is like, even if it's not addressed in the classroom in like explicit terms, there's like something going on that makes the vibe a little different. And I am grateful that people that I hadn't met, people that I did, they are just really wonderful. And I do so many activities that are not a part of my writing life, but that bolster and vitalize my own life, which is then, my writing life, right? I do so many activities with them that have nothing to do with the like quote unquote like work that we're doing. We like play basketball. We watch really bad movies. We got really into me and some friends got really into making bagels from scratch because we missed like bagels from the East Coast. And so, it was just something fun to do. And I will say, as someone who I'm not much of a canon reader, like reading of the literary canon, and I used to tell myself sort of flippantly before I got into an MFA, oh, they'll make me read like the important works. Like I didn't think I was well read, which I think maybe everyone thinks to a certain degree, that they're not well read. There's always more. Someone else is always reading more. But I was like, oh, they'll make me read stuff in school. That is not necessarily true, because obviously like it just depends on the professor. But I don't think any place is going to make you read stuff. Like I think this year we have more of a read like books and titles to read in our syllabi than last year. But that kind of stuff, your interest and your desire to research certain topics is ultimately still on you. I guess I was thinking of it in a sort of like high school lens, where like high school like assigns you read this book, and otherwise I wouldn't have encountered it, that, you know, something like that. It's like true to a certain extent, but ultimately you are still going to have to seek out those things. And if you want to talk about those books, or if you have an idea, I want to figure out how to write about pop culture because I don't know how to fit that into my poetics because they seem really divorced from each other. Do you have any really good poetry books about pop culture? Even stuff that is like low pop culture. Then you might get a bunch of recs, and then the professor might be like, when you're done reading that, we'll talk about it. And that's awesome. And that's what I'm in the middle of doing. But just ask the strange question. I'm interested in writing about joy. What did joy, and then you're given recommendations of, I've read poems about joy from the 19th and 20th century. And that is not something I would do on my own. But if I'm told, there might be something interesting here that you can see how it traces to current day, I'm like, I will do that. So think about what you want to read and want to learn, and the people will be able to help you, but they're not going to hand it to you themselves.
Jonny, thanks so much for stopping by. This has been a great conversation. I've had so much fun chatting with you. Lots of great advice, lots of great information about UW-Madison. But before we go, I'm not going to let you off the hook. You said you had an animal fact for every occasion, and I want to hear one.
One fact that is always in my back pocket, just because I think it's awesome. There are a couple breeds of jellyfish that, if nothing kills them, they will live forever. Because the way they are constructed is that if part of them gets diseased, or if some of their cells start degrading, right, as happens to all living organisms, they literally like jettison that part of their body off from like the main jelly. I don't know. And that part dies, and the main body keeps going, and they like glow in the dark, and and they like don't have brains. They got to figure it out. You know what I mean? Like, I want to glow in the dark and live forever, and not think about the horrors.
All right, jellyfish, we have something to aspire to.
Yeah, exactly.
Jonny, thanks again for stopping by. Thanks for chatting with me. Thanks for sharing your poetry. It's been a blast.
My pleasure. My pleasure.